Hey y'all. So moving into our next unit, we are going to start talking about quadratics. And to start with quadratics, we want to talk about solving those. The first method that we're going to cover is solving quadratics by factoring. Now, in our previous unit, we covered factoring. We looked at a bunch of different ways to factor expressions, whether it's factor by grouping, factoring just with two binomials, or if you had to multiply the first and the last term and then regroup. Any of those methods would work for this, but we do want to solve by factoring. So solving a quadratic means you're finding where the graph, the actual physical picture of the graph, crosses the x-axis, or finding where the zeros are. We do this using the zero product property. And off to the side here, I wrote this little note that the zero product property, what it means is that if you have two numbers, let's say I'm going to call them x and y, if they multiply together and equal 0, that means at least one or both of them has to equal 0. So if x times y equals 0, that works if x is equal to 0 or y is equal to 0. So the steps that we are going to follow to solve by factoring here is that the first step, and this is really important, is that we need to set the expression equal to 0. That has to be the very first step that we follow. If our expression is not equal to 0, we have to balance out the equation so that way one side is equal to 0. It has to be the very first step that we start, kind of like why we are finding the zeros here. The next step is to factor the expression. So we've already done that. It's nothing new there. The third step here is that we're going to set each factor equal to 0. And then the fourth and final step is going to be to solve. Solve for x. And when you do that, you might have multiple answers. More than likely, you will have multiple answers. So let's look at a couple examples. Let's say example 1 here. We are going to solve the expression x squared plus 6x plus 8. So we're going to solve this. So the first step that we're going to do is we're going to take this expression and we're going to set it equal to 0. So I get x squared plus 6x plus 8 equal to 0. So that's my very first step here. The next thing that we're going to do is factor. So when we're factoring, remember we're trying to figure out what multiplies to make this c term that adds to be in the middle here. So what are the factors of 8 that add up to 6? Well, that's 4 and 2. So I've got x plus 4 and x plus 2, and that's still equal to 0 here. So all I've done from one step to the next is factor the expression. The next thing that we want to do is we want to take each factor and we set it equal to 0. So what that means is that this part here, over here, I'm going to set that equal to 0. And I'm going to take the second factor here, and I'm going to set that equal to 0. And then we're going to go ahead and solve each of those for x. So I'm going to subtract 4 here on both sides. So I get x is equal to negative 4. And then when I subtract 2 over here, I get x is equal to negative 2. So I have two answers here. X is equal to negative 4 or x is equal to negative 2. And those are my two answers for this expression. So the only new part that I'm introducing within solving by factoring is that you have done up to this step before, where you know how to factor an expression. Now you just have to go the extra step and solve that expression. So let's give another example here. We're going to solve x squared plus 7x. So this is our expression, x squared plus 7x. I'm going to start by setting that equal to 0. X squared plus 7x equal to 0. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to factor this. And when we're factoring this expression, it's not that we're factoring a trinomial anymore. Rather, we're going to look at what is the greatest common factor of each expression that we could take out here. So each of them has an x that we can pull out. And then what remains is x plus 7 equal to 0. So I have x times x plus 7 equal to 0. Those are my two different factors here. I've got this x, and then I've got this x plus 7. So I'm going to set both of those equal to 0. And then solve. This x equal to 0 is already solved, but then if I subtract 7 on both sides, I get x is equal to 0. That part was already kind of given to us. Or x is equal to -7. So this one was pretty quick because once you factor it, you almost kind of have your answer already. So those are your two answers. X is equal to 0 and x is equal to -7. One last example here, and this one's going to be a little bit more. So example 3, we're going to solve 2x squared plus 5x minus 10 is equal to 2. All right, so here's our expression, 2x squared plus 5x minus 10 is equal to 2. The problem is that you'll notice is that this is not equal to 0. So when I'm starting this problem, I want to first get this to equal 0. So I'm going to subtract 2 on both sides of the equation here. So 2x squared plus 5x minus 12 is equal to 0. So maybe you want to add that note off to the side here. Needs to equal 0. So it needs to equal 0 to start. The next thing that we're going to do is factor. So given that we are factoring this expression where our leading coefficient is larger than 1, we've done this before in the past. So this is when you multiply the first and the last term, you split the middle term. I'll save you some time with that one. We're going to have 2x minus 3 and x plus 4 would be this expression factored. If you want to try that on your own and double check my answer, you're more than welcome to do so. I'm just saving a little bit of time here. So next, same thing. We're going to take each of these parts here, the 2x minus 3, and set it equal to 0. And then x plus 4, and set it equal to 0. And then we're going to solve for x. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides. So I get 2x is equal to 3 here. And then I divide by 2, divide by 2. So one of my answers is going to be 3 over 2. And I subtract 4, x is equal to -4, or I get that x is equal to -4. So this one gave us answers where one was a fraction and one's a whole number, but that's okay. There's still two different zeros. So solving by factoring, let's review the steps again. You have to set the expression equal to 0 first. Then you're going to factor. Factoring we already know. We spent an entire unit on it. You're going to set each of those factors equal to 0, and then you just have to solve for x where it's going to give you multiple different answer choices. So please copy these notes into your notebooks. We'll be reviewing this in class the next time that we meet. As always, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out.